In a world where space exploration pushes humanity's boundaries, Dr. Marcus Johnson stands ready to make history. As NASA's head of deep space communications, his seat on the first private orbital mission represents years of dedication and excellence. But when billionaire Victor Whitfield removes him from the mission moments before launch, Marcus faces a choice: accept the injustice or fight for something greater than himself. Witness the confrontation that shocked the world. Follow the calculated strategy of a brilliant mind determined to prove that space belongs to everyone. Experience the congressional hearing where truth collides with power. From public humiliation to systemic change, this is the story of one man's journey to transform discrimination into opportunity, revenge into reform, and exclusion into progress. Will the final frontier truly become accessible to all of humanity? Or will privilege continue to determine who reaches for the stars? Would you stand up against discrimination even if it cost you everything? Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe the universe belongs to everyone. The morning light streamed through the windows of Dr. Marcus Johnson's modest suburban home as he meticulously packed his flight bag at 5 a.m. His fingers traced over the NASA patches on his personal items, souvenirs from 17 years of distinguished service as an astrophysicist. At 47, Marcus had already achieved more than most scientists dream of in a lifetime. "You sure you've got everything?" asked Diane, his wife of 20 years, handing him a travel mug of coffee. Her eyes showed both pride and concern. "Triple-checked," Marcus replied, taking a sip. "Can't exactly run to the corner store if I forget something once we're in orbit." Their daughter Zoe appeared in the doorway, still in her MIT sweatshirt pajamas. At 19, she was following in her father's footsteps, already making waves in her aerospace engineering program. "Dad, you promised to video call from space," she reminded him, fighting back a yawn. Marcus smiled. "First thing after system checks, you'll see Earth the way I've always described it: no borders, just one beautiful blue marble." The family moment was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing. A text from Victor Whitfield himself. Final pre-launch briefing moved up. Car arriving in 30. Marcus frowned slightly. Whitfield Aerospace Technologies was known for last-minute changes, a corporate culture that contrasted sharply with NASA's methodical approach. But as the first private company to attempt a 10-day orbital mission with civilians aboard, some operational chaos was expected. "That's my cue," Marcus said, embracing his family. History waits for no one. The sleek black SUV that arrived was emblazoned with the distinctive Watt logo, a stylized planet with a rocket trajectory. The driver, a young man with a Bluetooth earpiece, barely acknowledged Marcus beyond confirming his identity. During the drive to Whitfield's private launch facility on the Florida coast, Marcus reviewed his notes on a tablet. As NASA's head of deep space communications, his role on this mission was officially labeled technical advisor. But everyone in the aerospace community understood the truth. He was there to ensure Whitfield's ambitious venture didn't endanger future space programs. The facility came into view, a sprawling complex of gleaming white buildings and launch pads built on land Whitfield had purchased from the government at a controversially low price 5 years ago. "Dr. Johnson," greeted Taylor Chen, the mission director, as Marcus entered the preparation area. "Glad you're early. Mr. Whitfield wants all crew members in the conference room in 15. Marcus nodded, setting down his bag and grabbing his credentials. "Any changes to the flight plan I should know about?" Taylor hesitated. "Nothing major, just be prepared for some last-minute mission objectives Mr. Whitfield might introduce." Last-minute objectives on a space mission. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's not how this works." "It is when you own the rocket," Taylor replied quietly. "Just tread carefully today." Whitfield's been on edge. Marcus had spent his career navigating bureaucracy at NASA, the Air Force before that, and as one of only 6 black students in his doctoral program at MIT. He recognized the warning in Taylor's tone. The conference room gradually filled with the other 5 crew members: 2 Whitfield engineers, a billionaire investor who'd paid for his seat, a popular science TV host documenting the journey, and Dr. Sarah Winters, a talented oceanographer who would be conducting Earth observation experiments. Sarah sat beside Marcus. "Ready for the adventure of a lifetime?" she asked with genuine enthusiasm. "Absolutely," Marcus replied, "though I'm more focused on making sure everyone gets back safely." The room fell silent as Victor Whitfield entered. At 52, the tech billionaire had the confident stride of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. His private space venture had been dismissed as a vanity project by many in the scientific community until he'd successfully launched 3 uncrewed orbital missions in the past 18 months. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitfield announced, "in just under 6 hours we make history together." His gaze swept across the room, lingering momentarily on Marcus before continuing. "This mission isn't just about proving private enterprise can succeed where bloated government programs crawl along. It's about changing humanity's relationship with space forever. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor despite the dig at NASA. He'd heard worse and the mission was too important to let ego get in the way. Now, Whitfield continued, activating a holographic display of their spacecraft, I've invited some special guests to join us for the launch, the kind of people who can ensure our next phase of funding. That wasn't in the mission briefing. Marcus made a note to review the weight calculations later. Every gram mattered in space flight, and unexpected guests at a launch meant unexpected variables. As the meeting continued, Marcus noticed Whitfield addressing questions to everyone except him, despite his being the most experienced space professional in the room. When Marcus finally raised a point about communication protocols, Whitfield cut him off. We're not running this like a government operation, Dr. Johnson. We move fast and break things here. With respect, Mr. Whitfield, Marcus replied evenly, in space, breaking things usually means people die. A tense silence fell over the room. Whitfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, that's why NASA sent you, isn't it? To keep us reckless innovators in check. The meeting adjourned shortly after. As Marcus gathered his materials, his NASA-issued phone buzzed with a message from his director. Check in when you can. Concerns about Watt safety protocols escalating. Congress asking questions. Marcus tucked the phone away, a sense of unease growing. He'd been through countless launches, had faced emergency situations in simulators, and helped design protocols that saved lives. But something about this mission felt different. Not the technology, the human element. As he headed to suit up for the pre-launch checks, he caught sight of Whitfield in an animated discussion with the investor crew member, both men glancing in his direction. Marcus straightened his shoulders and continued walking. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was prepared to face them, for science, for safety, and for the future of space exploration. What he couldn't know was just how soon and how severely those challenges would arrive. The Whitfield Aerospace Technologies pre-launch gala was held in a massive glass-walled pavilion overlooking the launch pad. At 7 p.m., the space was already filled with an eclectic mix of tech billionaires, politicians, celebrities, and a carefully selected group of science reporters. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering, where waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres priced higher than what many people earned in a day. Marcus stood near the back, nursing a club soda, his NASA formal uniform a stark contrast to the designer evening wear surrounding him. He'd attended plenty of NASA functions over the years, but nothing quite like this, where space exploration and Silicon Valley excess collided. There he is, our government babysitter, Victor Whitfield's voice carried across the room as he approached, flanked by two senators and a famous action movie star. His tone was jovial, but the underlying hostility was unmistakable. Mr. Whitfield, Marcus replied with a professional nod. Impressive gathering. Only the best for making history, Whitfield said, putting an arm around Marcus's shoulder for the benefit of nearby photographers. Though I'm sure it's quite different from NASA's potluck launches, eh? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the small crowd. NASA's focus tends to be on the mission rather than the party, Marcus responded evenly. But both approaches have their place. Whitfield's smile tightened. Well, without the party, there's no funding for the mission. That's why NASA keeps coming back to private industry, isn't it? Before Marcus could respond, Sarah Winters joined them, elegant in a simple blue dress. Dr. Johnson was just explaining NASA's collaborative approach to our oceanographic experiments, she interjected smoothly. The data we gather will benefit both public and private research. Marcus shot her a grateful look. Ah, Dr. Winters, Whitfield said, his demeanor instantly warming. The real scientist of our crew. You know, I told my board we needed someone with your credentials. Dr. Johnson's credentials are rather impressive as well, Sarah responded. 17 years at NASA, former Air Force captain, doctoral work in astrophysics and communication systems. We're fortunate to have him. Whitfield's expression cooled. Yes, NASA was very insistent on his inclusion. A waiter approached with a tray, and Whitfield grabbed 2 champagne flutes, handing one to Sarah while deliberately bypassing Marcus. If you'll excuse me, Marcus said, I should review the communications protocols once more before tomorrow. Always working, Whitfield said loudly. That's what I admire about NASA people, though one wonders if all that procedure hasn't held back real innovation. As Marcus moved away, he overheard Whitfield continuing, of course they had to send someone, diversity initiatives and all that, though I would have preferred one of their engineers with actual flight experience. Marcus tensed but kept walking. His 4 actual spaceflights and role in developing the very communications systems Whitfield's mission relied on apparently counted for nothing in the billionaire's mind. Near the bar, he encountered Taylor Chen again, who cast a sympathetic glance his way. He's been like that all week, Taylor said quietly, worse when the cameras aren't around. I'm not here to win a popularity contest, Marcus replied, just to ensure mission success. You might want to document some of these interactions, Taylor suggested, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Several of us already are, Marcus raised an eyebrow. That bad, Taylor nodded. There's a reason the company's having trouble retaining diverse talent. The launch team is the most homogeneous group I've worked with in my career. Before they could continue, a loud ping sounded as Whitfield tapped his glass for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we make history. The first fully private orbital mission with a civilian crew. While others talk about democratizing space, we're actually doing it. Applause filled the room. I'd like to introduce our historic crew, Whitfield continued, gesturing toward a small stage where spotlights suddenly illuminated. Please join me. The crew assembled on stage. Marcus noticed he'd been positioned at the very end, partially in shadow. Greg Matheson and Alyssa Kim, Whitfield aerospace engineers who designed key systems for our vessel. The two young engineers waved to applause. James Collins, venture capitalist and pioneer investor in private space technology. The billionaire investor flashed a brilliant white smile. Dr. Sarah Winters, oceanographer extraordinaire conducting breakthrough research. Sarah nodded graciously. Devin Hayes, bringing the wonder of space to millions through his science program. The TV host gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. And Dr. Marcus Johnson, NASA's contribution to our mission. The pause was subtle but unmistakable, so was the diminishing of his role. When the introductions concluded, reporters crowded around for questions. One approached Marcus. Dr. Johnson, as NASA's representative, what do you think of private companies potentially overtaking government space programs? Before Marcus could answer, Whitfield stepped in. Dr. Johnson isn't here to make policy statements. He's a technical advisor only. The reporter looked confused. But as head of deep space communications. Perhaps direct NASA questions to NASA, Whitfield interrupted with a tight smile. Tonight is about Whitfield Aerospace Technologies. As the evening wore on, Marcus documented 3 more instances where Whitfield either interrupted him, spoke over him, or minimized his contributions. He noticed Sarah and Taylor doing the same on their phones, discreetly recording timestamps and quotes. By the time Marcus returned to the crew quarters at 11 p.m., a growing sense of unease had settled over him. This was supposed to be the pinnacle of public-private space cooperation. Instead, it felt increasingly adversarial and personal. He sent a brief, carefully worded message to his NASA director, pre-launch environment concerning, suggest backup communications protocol implementation. The response came quickly, authorized, stay vigilant. Marcus looked out his window at the gleaming rocket illuminated against the night sky. Tomorrow they would be sealed inside that vehicle, 250 miles above Earth, completely dependent on each other. The thought that had never bothered him before now left him sleepless. The morning of the launch dawned clear and perfect, with only a 2% chance of weather delays according to the latest meteorological reports. At 5 a.m., Marcus stood on the gantry walkway beside the gleaming Whitfield 1 spacecraft, conducting his personal inspection as the rest of the crew completed their final medical checks. Impressive machine, came a voice from behind him. It was Devin Hayes, the science show host, already in his flight suit. Never thought I'd actually go to space when I started my show, Marcus nodded. It's a solid vessel. Whitfield's engineers borrowed heavily from proven NASA designs, which was smart. Between us, Devin said, lowering his voice, last night was uncomfortable. I've interviewed hundreds of scientists and your credentials are extraordinary, the way he spoke to you. I appreciate the concern, Marcus replied professionally, but today is about the mission. Personal dynamics are secondary. Devin looked like he wanted to say more, but instead simply nodded. Well, I'm recording everything for the show. Posterity, you know, Marcus smiled slightly. Documentation is always wise. By 6 a.m., all 6 crew members gathered in the ready room for final briefings. Victor Whitfield arrived 20 minutes late, flanked by his personal documentary crew, another deviation from protocol that hadn't been mentioned before. Good morning, history makers, Whitfield announced, clapping his hands together. Slight change of plans, we're adding a live broadcast component during the launch sequence. Marcus frowned. That wasn't in the flight plan. Additional communications during critical launch phases increase risk. The world deserves to witness this moment, Whitfield replied dismissively. My company, my rules. NASA flight regulations explicitly state, Marcus began. NASA isn't running this mission, Whitfield cut in sharply. I respect your agency's contributions, Dr. Johnson, but final decisions rest with me. The room fell uncomfortably silent. Marcus noticed several engineers exchanging concerned glances. Oh, Whitfield continued, I've decided on a slight seating rearrangement. He projected the cabin schematic on the wall. Dr. Winters will take position 2 next to me for better visual composition during the broadcast. Position 2 had been Marcus's assigned seat, the one with direct access to the backup communications panel, a critical safety role. With respect, Mr. Whitfield, Marcus said firmly, that position was assigned based on safety protocols, not visual composition. In the event of primary communications failure, Position 2 needs immediate access to backup systems. Our systems have triple redundancy, Whitfield countered, and Dr. Winters is more than capable. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Actually, I'd prefer my assigned position. Dr. Johnson has trained specifically for the backup communications role. Whitfield's expression hardened. I've made my decision. As the briefing concluded, the mission director approached Marcus. I'll try to talk to him before boarding, Taylor promised quietly. The crew proceeded to the suit-up room. The tension was palpable as technicians helped them into their flight suits, white with the Whitfield Aerospace logo prominently displayed, except for Marcus's, which bore both NASA and Whitfield insignias. At 7:30 a.m., with suits checked and systems go, the crew walked toward the elevator that would take them to the boarding gantry, the traditional crew walk captured by cameras and broadcast worldwide. Victor Whitfield positioned himself at the center, with Sarah placed prominently beside him. Marcus found himself at the back of the formation. The ascending elevator was cramped with 6 suited astronauts. 2 hours to history, Whitfield announced. Any last words for Earth before we leave it behind? Each crew member shared brief, thoughtful statements. When Marcus's turn came, Whitfield checked his watch. We're running behind schedule, let's keep moving. At the boarding platform, with the spacecraft hatch open and waiting, Whitfield suddenly stopped. News cameras whirred in the distance, capturing every moment. One final announcement, he said loudly enough for the microphones to pick up. Due to last-minute technical considerations, we're making a change to our crew manifest. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Dr. Johnson will be remaining behind for this historic flight. The other crew members looked stunned. Marcus stepped forward. What technical considerations? I completed all checks successfully. Our engineers identified potential incompatibilities between NASA communication protocols and our systems during last night's final review, Whitfield stated smoothly. Rather than risk mission success, we've decided to proceed with our core team. It was a blatant lie. The systems had been checked and rechecked for months. Marcus had personally certified their compatibility. The NASA-Whitfield agreement requires a NASA presence on this mission for certification, Marcus stated firmly. A requirement we intend to honor on future flights, Whitfield replied. Today's mission has been reclassified as a final test flight. Several engineers from the launch team had gathered nearby, many looking as surprised as the crew. Mr. Whitfield, Taylor Chen interjected, this directly violates our flight plan and regulatory approvals. Security, Whitfield called, and 2 large men in Whitfield Aerospace uniforms appeared. Please escort Dr. Johnson back to the preparation area. There seems to be some confusion about his role today. One of the security officers stepped toward Marcus. Sir, if you'll come with us. Devin Hayes had his personal camera out recording. Are you removing NASA's head of deep space communications from a space mission over fake technical concerns? He asked loudly, his professional interviewer's voice projecting clearly. This is a private company decision, Whitfield replied stiffly. We have the right to determine our flight manifest. Is it a company decision? Sarah Winters asked clearly. Or is it because you've been making discriminatory comments about Dr. Johnson since he arrived? The security officers hesitated, looking uncertainly between Whitfield and the cameras now trained on the unfolding scene. Marcus remained composed despite the public humiliation. Mr. Whitfield, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This action compromises mission safety and violates multiple agreements. Your advice is noted, Whitfield snapped. And no longer needed. Security, please remove Dr. Johnson from the launch area immediately. As the security officers moved to take Marcus's arms, Devin stepped between them. I'm recording this for my 50 million viewers just so everyone's clear about what's happening. The confrontation had now drawn the attention of every camera on the launch pad. Marcus knew he had to make a strategic decision. Creating a scene could potentially delay the launch and put the mission at risk, regardless of Whitfield's behavior. I will exit voluntarily, Marcus announced clearly, under protest and with formal notification that this action violates NASA Whitfield protocols. He turned to address the engineers directly. I strongly recommend mission abort until proper safety protocols can be restored. As Marcus was escorted away from the spacecraft, he heard Sarah call out, I'm withdrawing from the mission as well. This is unacceptable. The launch proceeds as scheduled, Whitfield announced over her. Anyone who wishes to withdraw can join Dr. Johnson in obscurity. The security officers led Marcus toward the elevator, past shocked technicians and engineers, many of whom were already on their phones. One whispered as he passed, We've got it all on the official feed, every word. Marcus maintained his dignity as he descended from the launch platform, his mind already moving to what would happen next. Whatever Whitfield's personal motivations, he had just made a catastrophic public relations error. and potentially endangered his own mission. Within 30 minutes of being escorted from the launch area, Marcus had established an impromptu command center in a small conference room at the Whitfield Aerospace Administrative Building. His NASA credentials still provided access to most facility systems, though he noticed his clearance being systematically restricted as he watched. Dr. Johnson, NASA Director Lambert is on Secure Line 1, announced Jessica Patel, a NASA liaison who had been stationed at the facility. Her expression was a mixture of concern and professional composure. Marcus activated the encrypted connection. "Sir, Johnson, what the hell is happening down there?" Director Lambert's voice was tense but measured. "I've got the White House Science Office, 3 congressional committees, and half the aerospace regulatory bodies lighting up my phones. Whitfield removed me from the mission approximately 45 minutes before scheduled launch," Marcus reported, keeping his tone clinical. "Claimed technical incompatibilities with NASA systems, which is demonstrably false. Dr. Winters attempted to withdraw in protest but was apparently pressured to remain. We've seen the footage. It's already trending globally." Lambert sighed, "The launch, proceeding according to schedule, T-minus 67 minutes. Your assessment," Marcus chose his words carefully. "The vehicle and systems are sound, the crew is qualified, but Whitfield's decision-making appears increasingly erratic and potentially compromised by personal bias." "Document everything," Lambert instructed. "I'm activating Protocol Sentinel." Protocol Sentinel was NASA's contingency plan for private partnership failures, a series of predetermined steps designed to protect both the agency and mission safety when collaborations broke down. "Understood," Marcus replied. "Sentinel activated." After ending the call, Marcus turned to Jessica. "I need access to all communication logs between my arrival and removal from the mission, and I need to speak with Taylor Chen as soon as possible." "Mr. Chen is currently restricted to launch control," Jessica reported, fingers flying over her tablet, "but he's requesting a secure channel to you." At 8:15 a.m., Marcus established the secure connection. Taylor's face appeared on the screen, the launch control center visible behind him. "Dr. Johnson, I've documented everything," Taylor said without preamble. "Whitfield's claiming this was planned all along, a last-minute test of crew adaptability. But I've got the original manifests and flight plans on secure backup." "What's the crew status?" "Boarding complete. Dr. Winters almost walked, but Whitfield threatened to blacklist her from all future oceanographic research opportunities if she did." Taylor lowered his voice. "Devin Hayes is still recording everything, says his contract gives him full editorial control of all footage." "Good, we need eyes inside," Marcus nodded, making notes. "What about regulatory approval for the modified manifest?" "There isn't any. Whitfield's claiming emergency powers under the Commercial Space Launch Act provisions for test flights." Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from a government number. "Keep me updated. I need to take this." The call was from Congresswoman Alina Martinez, chair of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. "Dr. Johnson, I've just watched what appears to be a flagrant violation of the NASA private partnership protocols. My committee needs your immediate assessment." "Congresswoman, I can confirm that Mr. Whitfield has violated several provisions of our agreement," Marcus stated. "However, my primary concern remains mission safety. I recommend focusing first on ensuring the current crew returns safely, then addressing regulatory violations." "Agreed. A formal inquiry will begin today, but safety comes first," Martinez replied. "The FAA is reviewing whether to suspend Whitfield's launch license for future missions. What's your recommendation?" "I'd advise against immediate suspension while a crew is in orbit," Marcus said, "but I would recommend conditional continuation with enhanced oversight." After ending the call, Marcus turned back to his impromptu command center. Jessica had set up multiple screens displaying launch preparations, social media reactions, and Whitfield Aerospace's stock price, which was already dropping sharply. "Dr. Johnson," Jessica said, handing him a tablet, "I've compiled all recorded instances of Mr. Whitfield's comments and actions toward you since your arrival." The document was comprehensive, timestamps, witnesses, exact quotes, including several Marcus hadn't personally heard. "This is thorough," he noted. "The engineering team has been documenting his behavior for months," Jessica explained. "Your situation isn't isolated. 3 qualified engineers resigned last quarter citing similar treatment." At 8:45 a.m., Marcus received another secure call, this time from NASA's legal department. "Dr. Johnson, we're preparing both regulatory and potential civil actions," the lead counsel explained. "Mr. Whitfield's actions potentially violate multiple federal statutes regarding discrimination and contractual obligations." "I understand," Marcus replied, "but my focus remains on mission safety. The crew still includes 5 individuals who deserve our full support." "Of course, But we need to address a critical question. Does Whitfield Aerospace still have valid authorization to proceed with orbit insertion without NASA personnel aboard? Marcus paused, considering carefully. The question cut to the heart of the situation. Without NASA certification, Whitfield's mission would be limited to suborbital flight only, a significant reduction in scope and prestige. Technically, no, he finally answered. The orbital certification was contingent on NASA oversight during the mission. Thank you, we'll proceed accordingly. By 9 a.m., with 30 minutes until launch, Marcus had established communication with NASA Mission Control in Houston, synchronizing their monitoring of the Whitfield launch. Dr. Johnson called Jessica from her workstation. You need to see this. She displayed a document on the main screen, an internal Whitfield memo dated 3 days earlier discussing contingency plans for NASA personnel removal and reclassification strategies to maintain launch schedule. This was planned, Marcus realized. He never intended to keep me on that mission. There's more, Jessica continued. Financial records show Whitfield shorting his own company stock yesterday. The pieces clicked into place. He's manufacturing a crisis he can resolve heroically, Marcus concluded. Create a problem, take a financial position to benefit from it, then emerge as the solution. At T-15 minutes, Marcus made a decisive move. He contacted the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. This is Dr. Marcus Johnson, NASA Deep Space Communications. I need to speak with Administrator Wilson immediately regarding the Whitfield launch. The administrator came on the line moments later. Dr. Johnson, I've been briefed on the situation. What's your assessment? I believe Mr. Whitfield has deliberately created a regulatory crisis as part of a market manipulation strategy, Marcus explained. The mission can proceed safely from a technical standpoint, but I recommend conditional authorization with stipulated return parameters. Meaning, allow the launch but restrict the mission to a 24-hour duration rather than the planned 10 days. This prioritizes crew safety while limiting Whitfield's ability to profit from his scheme. The administrator was silent for a moment. That's within our authority. I'll issue the modified authorization immediately. At T-5 minutes with the launch countdown proceeding, Marcus watched as Whitfield received the FAA's modified authorization. Even from the distance of the monitoring cameras, his fury was evident. The launch proceeded on schedule. As the Whitfield 1 spacecraft rose majestically on a column of flame, Marcus felt mixed emotions. Pride in the human achievement, concern for the crew, and determination to ensure justice was served. When the spacecraft reached its preliminary orbit, Marcus activated his direct line to NASA Mission Control. Houston, this is Johnson at Whitfield Ground. I'm implementing Operation Deep Shield. Confirmed, Dr. Johnson. Deep Shield protocols active. What Victor Whitfield didn't yet realize was that NASA's deep space communication systems, the very systems Marcus had designed, controlled every aspect of data transmission once a spacecraft left low Earth orbit. And without the proper authorization codes, which only Marcus possessed, Whitfield's historic 10-day mission would find itself very suddenly limited. The real power play had only just begun. By noon, the Whitfield 1 spacecraft had completed its first orbital insertion, but the real spectacle was unfolding on Earth. Every major news network had broken their regular programming to cover what was now being called Spacegate, the unprecedented removal of a black NASA senior official from a historic space mission moments before launch. Marcus observed the situation from his improvised command center, now expanded to include 3 NASA communications specialists and a legal advisor flown in from Washington. 6 screens displayed different news feeds, all featuring the same dramatic footage of Marcus being escorted away from the launch pad. CNN is reporting that Whitfield Aerospace stock has dropped 27% since opening, Jessica reported, updating her analytics dashboard. Trading was temporarily halted but has resumed with continuing losses. Marcus nodded, focused on the technical readouts from the spacecraft. How's the crew's biometric data? Elevated stress indicators across the board, responded Dr. Rivera, the NASA flight surgeon who had joined them remotely, particularly from Dr. Winters and Devin Hayes. At 12:30 p.m., the first direct communication from the spacecraft arrived, not through the official mission channel, but through a secured NASA back channel that Marcus had established as a contingency. Ground control, this is Hayes aboard Whitfield 1, came Devin's voice, slightly distorted but clear enough. I'm using the emergency NASA frequency as instructed in the contingency briefing. Situation report follows. Marcus leaned forward. We read you, Hayes, proceed. Whitfield is volatile. Immediately after achieving orbit, he learned about the FAA's mission duration restriction. He's been in contact with his legal team almost continuously since then. Dr. Winters is being isolated. Whitfield ordered her to complete her experiments in the research module alone. What about the engineers? Marcus asked. compliant but visibly uncomfortable. The investor, Collins, is fully aligned with Whitfield. They've been discussing some kind of contingency press strategy in private. Any technical issues with the vessel? Systems nominal, but Devon paused. Whitfield has locked out certain communication functions. I believe he's attempting to block NASA's override capabilities. Marcus exchanged glances with his team. Understood, continue monitoring and report any escalation. Your safety is the priority. After ending the transmission, Marcus activated a secure line to NASA headquarters. We need to prepare for Whitfield attempting to extend the mission beyond FAA authorization, he explained to Director Lambert. I recommend activating the Deep Space Network restrictions now rather than waiting. Authorized, Lambert replied. And Johnson, there's something else you should know. We've received word that Whitfield's PR team is preparing to release a statement claiming you were removed due to erratic behavior and technical incompetence that allegedly endangered the mission. Marcus remained composed, though he felt a flash of anger. A preemptive smear campaign. Precisely. Your thoughts on response strategy? Let the evidence speak for itself, Marcus decided. I have 17 years of spotless NASA service records versus 3 days of documented discrimination. Release my full professional record to counter his claims. By 2 p.m., the media landscape had transformed into a battleground. Whitfield Aerospace released their statement, complete with selectively edited video clips attempting to portray Marcus as difficult and uncooperative. The response was swift and overwhelming. 3 former astronauts who had worked with Marcus issued immediate statements of support. The Air Force released his service record, highlighting his decorations and commendations. MIT's Aerospace Department issued a statement celebrating his contributions to communication systems design. Most damaging to Whitfield, however, was the full, unedited video released by Devon Hayes's production company, showing every interaction between Whitfield and Marcus from the moment they met, including the private comments Whitfield didn't realize were being recorded. Social media exploded with the hashtag #JusticeForJohnson. By 3 p.m., it was trending globally. Dr. Johnson, Jessica called from her station, Congresswoman Martinez is holding an emergency press conference. You'll want to see this. On screen, the Congresswoman stood at a podium surrounded by members of the Congressional Black Caucus and the House Science Committee. What we witnessed today was not only a violation of NASA private partnership agreements, but a disturbing display of discrimination against one of our nation's most accomplished space program leaders, Martinez stated firmly. I am announcing an immediate congressional investigation into Whitfield Aerospace's practices, with particular attention to patterns of discrimination and potential securities fraud related to today's events. At 4 p.m., a call came in from an unexpected source, Sarah Winters, using the spacecraft's medical emergency channel. Dr. Johnson, I wanted you to know I've documented everything that's happened on board, she said quietly. Whitfield doesn't know I have access to this channel. He's planning something. He keeps talking about making history regardless of bureaucratic interference. Can you be more specific? Marcus asked. He's instructed the engineers to prepare for what he's calling an extended demonstration of capabilities. I believe he's planning to violate the 24-hour mission restriction. This confirmation of Marcus's suspicions necessitated immediate action. Thank you, Dr. Winters. Please prioritize your safety. We'll handle things from here. After the call, Marcus gathered his team. It's time to implement Deep Shield fully. Whitfield is planning to defy FAA restrictions. That could trigger an international incident, the legal advisor warned. Unauthorized spacecraft movements violate multiple treaties. Which is why we won't let it happen, Marcus replied. Activate the communication protocol lockdown. As of now, Whitfield 1 can receive but not transmit except through NASA-approved channels. As evening approached, Victor Whitfield finally appeared on the official mission broadcast, his face strained but maintaining a veneer of control. Today has been historic in ways we didn't anticipate, he began, clearly reading from prepared remarks. While we regret the controversies that have distracted from our mission's achievements, Whitfield Aerospace remains committed to pushing the boundaries of private space exploration. What Whitfield didn't realize was that his attempted broadcast had been intercepted, delayed, and was now being analyzed in real time before release. There it is, Marcus said, pointing to a specific section of Whitfield's statement. He's announcing an extension of the mission to fully demonstrate capabilities despite bureaucratic limitations. Release the redacted version omitting that section and implement the final Deep Shield protocol. With that command, NASA's Deep Space Network took complete control of Whitfield 1 navigation and propulsion systems, a contingency measure built into all spacecraft using NASA communication technology. The message to Victor Whitfield was clear. He might own the rocket, but in the vast expanse of space, NASA still held the keys. 3 weeks after the Whitfield 1 spacecraft made its controlled return to Earth, precisely within the 24-hour mission window mandated by the FAA, the Grand Chamber of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology filled to capacity. At 9 a.m., the wood-paneled room hummed with anticipation as congressional staffers, journalists, aerospace industry representatives, and members of the public took their seats. Marcus sat at the witness table, reviewing his prepared statement one final time. Beside him sat NASA Director Lambert, FAA Administrator Wilson, and Sarah Winters, who had become an unexpected ally in the aftermath of the truncated mission. The empty chair at the far end of the table, reserved for Victor Whitfield, spoke volumes. "The committee will come to order," announced Congresswoman Martinez, gaveling the session to begin. "Today we examine the events surrounding the Whitfield Aerospace Technologies launch of March 29, 2025, and the broader implications for public-private partnerships in space exploration." Camera shutters clicked rapidly as Martinez continued. "Before we begin, I'll note for the record that Mr. Victor Whitfield has declined our invitation to appear, citing scheduling conflicts. The committee finds this excuse inadequate and will consider compulsory measures if necessary." Martinez turned to the witnesses. "Dr. Johnson, as the NASA official at the center of these events, will begin with your testimony." Marcus adjusted his microphone. "Thank you, Chairwoman Martinez and distinguished committee members. I appear before you today not as an individual seeking redress, but as a representative of NASA's core values: safety, integrity, and cooperation." He proceeded with a methodical recounting of events, presenting evidence chronologically without embellishment or emotional commentary. The documentation was devastating in its thoroughness: timestamped video footage, audio recordings, internal memos, witness statements, and technical analyses. In conclusion, Marcus stated, what began as apparent personal bias escalated into decisions that compromised mission parameters, violated federal agreements, and potentially endangered crew safety. These actions reveal systemic issues requiring congressional attention. For the next hour, committee members from both parties questioned Marcus. The rare bipartisan unity reflected the seriousness with which Congress viewed the incident. "Dr. Johnson," began Congressman Reynolds, a former military pilot, "in your professional assessment, was this an isolated incident or indicative of broader issues in private space ventures?" "The evidence suggests a pattern rather than an anomaly," Marcus replied carefully. "My research team has identified 17 similar incidents across private space companies in the past 5 years, incidents where qualified professionals from underrepresented groups faced obstruction or removal from mission-critical roles." Reynolds nodded gravely. "And these incidents were not publicly reported. Most were settled privately with non-disclosure agreements, effectively concealing the pattern." When Sarah Winters took the stand, her testimony proved equally powerful. "Once aboard the spacecraft," she recounted, "Mr. Whitfield explicitly stated that Dr. Johnson's removal had been planned days in advance and that, I quote, NASA diversity hire won't interfere with my mission. He then instructed us to support a narrative of technical incompatibility if questioned." At 11:30 a.m., during a brief recess, Marcus received an unexpected message from Devin Hayes. "Turn on financial news immediately." Marcus borrowed a congressional aide's tablet and saw the breaking news. The Securities and Exchange Commission had just announced a formal investigation into Victor Whitfield for securities fraud related to the short selling of his company's stock before the launch incident. When the hearing resumed, Congresswoman Martinez addressed this development. "The committee has been notified of the SEC's action against Mr. Whitfield. While we will not prejudge those proceedings, they add significant context to our investigation." The afternoon session focused on systemic reforms. NASA Director Lambert outlined proposed changes to partnership agreements, including mandatory anti-discrimination provisions with financial penalties and mission certification revocation for violations. "We're also implementing what we're calling the Johnson Protocol," Lambert explained, "a comprehensive framework ensuring that qualified personnel cannot be removed from missions without multi-agency review, regardless of whether the launch vehicle is publicly or privately owned." At 3 p.m., the committee called a surprise witness, Taylor Chen, who had resigned as Whitfield Aerospace's mission director the week after the incident. "I can confirm that Whitfield Aerospace maintained 2 sets of personnel policies," Chen testified, displaying internal documents on the chamber screens. "One for public and regulatory review, and another, the actual guidelines as they were called, for internal use." The documents revealed explicit instructions to limit the authority of female and minority team members and to concentrate decision-making power among a small group of Whitfield's personal associates. "Furthermore," Chen continued, When Dr. Johnson implemented NASA's Deep Shield protocol to prevent Mr. Whitfield from violating the FAA's mission parameters, Mr. Whitfield ordered our engineers to attempt to override NASA's control systems, a direct violation of international space law. This revelation sent ripples of shock through the chamber. Unauthorized control override attempts were considered among the most serious violations of space operations protocols. As the hearing neared its conclusion, Congresswoman Martinez addressed Marcus directly. Dr. Johnson, you've had a distinguished career at NASA and served your country honorably. The evidence presented today suggests you faced discrimination and professional sabotage of the most public kind, yet you prioritized mission safety and crew welfare throughout. What actions do you believe Congress should take in response? Marcus paused, considering his answer carefully. Space exploration represents humanity's highest aspirations, he finally replied. Its benefits must be accessible to all of humanity, not just as consumers of the knowledge gained, but as participants in the discovery process. I recommend 3 specific actions. First, establish clear regulatory frameworks that require all space ventures, public or private, to maintain diverse, qualified teams and protect them from discrimination. Second, create transparency requirements for private space companies receiving government contracts or using public resources. Third, establish an independent oversight body with representatives from both government and industry to monitor compliance and investigate violations without conflicts of interest. After 6 hours of testimony, as the hearing concluded, Martinez made an announcement that would reshape the future of private space exploration. Based on today's testimony, this committee will draft comprehensive legislation addressing discriminatory practices in space ventures. The proposed Space Accessibility and Fairness Act will ensure that the final frontier truly benefits from humanity's full range of talent and perspective. Outside the hearing room, journalists swarmed the witnesses. One reporter thrust a microphone toward Marcus. Dr. Johnson, Whitfield's spokesperson, just released a statement calling this a witch hunt against innovation. Your response? Marcus answered with the calm dignity that had characterized his actions throughout the ordeal. Innovation thrives on diversity of thought and experience. What we witnessed wasn't the protection of innovation, it was the protection of privilege. The stars belong to all of us. The quote would lead news broadcasts across the nation that evening, as the ripple effects of one man's principled stand continued to expand, reaching from the halls of Congress to the furthest reaches of space exploration policy. 6 months after the congressional hearing, Marcus Johnson stood at the podium in NASA's main auditorium, addressing a packed room of aerospace professionals, government officials, and media representatives. Behind him, a large screen displayed the newly established Office of Space Industry Ethics and Compliance (OSIC) logo, an organization he now led as its inaugural director. Thank you for joining us today for this significant milestone, Marcus began. The Space Accessibility and Fairness Act, signed into law last month, represents not just legislative action, but a fundamental recommitment to ensuring space exploration serves humanity's highest ideals. The audience included many familiar faces from the Whitfield incident. Sarah Winters, now heading the Oceanographic Space Research Initiative; Devin Hayes, whose documentary Above Discrimination had won critical acclaim; and Taylor Chen, recently appointed as technical advisor to the Congressional Space Committee. I'm pleased to announce the first comprehensive set of compliance guidelines for public-private space partnerships, Marcus continued. These standards establish clear benchmarks for diversity, inclusion, and non-discrimination across all phases of mission development and execution. At precisely 10 a.m., a notification appeared on the screens throughout the auditorium. Whitfield Aerospace Technologies officially renamed to Horizon Space Systems following completed acquisition. The timing wasn't coincidental. Victor Whitfield's empire had collapsed spectacularly in the aftermath of the incident. The SEC investigation had uncovered extensive securities fraud. Multiple civil lawsuits from investors and former employees had drained company resources. When evidence emerged that Whitfield had attempted to bribe FAA officials to obtain his original launch permits, criminal charges followed. The acquisition of his company, at a fraction of its former valuation, by a consortium led by Dr. Sarah Winters and backed by ethical investment funds, represented the final chapter in Whitfield's fall. These guidelines include a revolutionary enforcement mechanism, Marcus explained to the audience. The Deep Shield Protocol is now formally incorporated into all space systems utilizing NASA technology or accessing the Deep Space Network, ensuring that no vessel can operate beyond Earth orbit without adherence to non-discrimination policies. Following the presentation, Marcus met with a small group of young aerospace engineers. the inaugural fellows of the Johnson Space Equity Initiative, a program providing opportunities to underrepresented groups in the space industry. The most important lesson from my experience, he told them, isn't about discrimination or even justice. It's about systems design. We've created communication systems robust enough to function across the void of space, yet our human systems remained vulnerable to bias and exclusion. True innovation requires both technical excellence and ethical framework. Later that afternoon, Marcus visited Diane and Zoe at their home, where a small celebration awaited. His journey through the past 6 months had been both professionally demanding and personally challenging. The public nature of the incident had thrust him into an unexpected spotlight with all the attendant pressures. "Dad, have you seen the acceptance rates for the Space Equity Program?" Zoe asked excitedly, showing him the statistics on her tablet. "Applications from minority students increased 340% this year." "That's the real victory," Marcus replied, smiling. "Not what happened to Whitfield, but what's happening because of it." As evening approached, Marcus received a video call from NASA Mission Control. "Dr. Johnson, thought you'd want to witness this moment," said the flight director. "Horizon 1 is about to make first contact with the International Space Station." On screen, Marcus watched as the first spacecraft launched by the reformed company with Sarah Winters commanding completed its docking procedure. The mission carried scientific experiments designed by universities with historically underrepresented student populations. "Docking complete," came Sarah's voice over the comm system. "Permission to come aboard." "Permission granted, Horizon 1, replied the ISS commander. Making history the right way this time. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone watching. The same spacecraft design that had once been the vehicle for discrimination had become a vessel for inclusion. Later that night, Marcus stood in his backyard gazing up at the stars. His phone buzzed with a notification, a message from Congresswoman Martinez, Justice Department closing Whitfield case. Guilty plea accepted. 5-year sentence, permanent ban from aerospace industry leadership positions. Marcus put the phone away, returning his gaze to the night sky. The resolution brought satisfaction but not joy. True victory lay elsewhere, in the systemic changes now firmly established, in the doors opened for future generations, in the principle affirmed that space exploration must reflect humanity's diversity. As if on cue, the International Space Station appeared as a bright point of light tracking across the sky, a testament to international cooperation, shared purpose, and the best of human potential. "That's the final orbit," Marcus whispered to himself. "Not revenge but reform, not punishment but progress." The journey had cost him a historic spaceflight but gained humanity a more inclusive pathway to the stars. In the grand calculus of a life dedicated to exploration, it was an exchange he would make again without hesitation. As the station disappeared over the horizon, Marcus smiled. The next generation of space explorers, including those who would have been excluded under the old system, would travel further, reach higher, and explore more deeply because one man had chosen dignity over revenge, truth over silence, and justice over personal ambition. The stars belonged to everyone now. That was victory enough.